Earth is crawling with millions of wildly distinct biological forms, but to trace the origin of every breathing, swimming, and flying creature today, you have to rewind roughly 2 billion years to a single primitive cellular ancestor. Looking at that immense timeline, it's easy to view evolution as an aggressive, unstoppable force of nature pushing life constantly forward. But the underlying math tells a completely different story. If you look at the raw equations of genetics, biology naturally defaults to absolute, permanent stagnation. To figure out how life managed to leap from ancient oceans to modern civilization, we first have to understand why, mathematically speaking, none of this should have ever happened. In population genetics, the theoretical baseline for how genes behave is called the Hardy-Weinberg principle. We can look at this through a standard mathematical model. If you track the specific variations of a gene, called alleles, within a closed population, we assign them variables, p and q. The Hardy-Weinberg equation, p squared plus 2pq plus q squared equals 1, shows exactly how these alleles are distributed. Without outside interference, this sum always equals 1. Generation after generation, these ratios remain entirely fixed. This is known as genetic equilibrium. And if this perfect mathematical state held true in the physical world, life on Earth would still be trapped as a thin layer of single-celled sludge. But the physical world is far from a theoretical vacuum. It is deeply chaotic, subjecting this equilibrium to a relentless barrage of disruptions. Two of these disruptions happen at the microscopic level. First, you have mutation, which literally injects brand new raw genetic material into the population. Then, during reproduction, genetic recombination violently shuffles that material into novel configurations. Outside the cell, environmental forces attack the equation next. When external populations migrate and mix, they cause a gene flow that alters the original frequencies. Or pure chance events wipe out segments of small, isolated populations, creating wild swings in the numbers, a process known as genetic drift. Together, these four factors guarantee that biology is constantly flooded with raw chaos. The mathematical equation is never allowed to settle. Yet, sheer biological chaos doesn't build a functioning ecosystem on its own. It requires a fifth decisive mechanism to break the equilibrium with precision: natural selection. Natural selection acts as a strict environmental filter. It sorts through the random variations caused by mutations and genetic drift, heavily favoring traits that enable better survival, allowing those specific individuals to reproduce and leave more progeny. This chart shows how this filtering process actually pushes a population over time. Selection can force a shift in three distinct directions. It can be stabilizing, which pinches the curve tightly toward the average character value. It can be directional, dragging the entire peak toward a new extreme. Or it can be disruptive, gouging out the center and pushing the population toward two opposite peripheral extremes. When we combine all of these 5 factors, we arrive at a startlingly concrete definition of how species change. Whenever scientists measure allele frequencies in the real world and find that they deviate from the expected Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium values, that measured difference is the exact extent of evolutionary change. Evolution is not driven by intent or magical design. It is simply the measurable, mathematical failure of a biological population to maintain its stasis. When you take these 5 forces, these broken equations, and apply them to an entire planet over hundreds of millions of years, the macroscopic results are staggering. Take a highly specific instance of directional selection from roughly 350 million years ago. Certain oceanic fish began developing uniquely stout, highly muscled fins that allowed them to briefly pull themselves out of the water and traverse solid ground. For decades, these transitional lobefin species were known only from fossils, but in 1938, a fish caught off the coast of South Africa proved to be a living coelacanth, a creature thought to be long extinct. You can clearly see the distinct limb-like lower fins that bridge the anatomical gap between ocean swimmers and landwalkers. As directional selection continued to push these populations further onto land, they transitioned into the first amphibians. Eventually, some developed the ability to lay thick-shelled eggs that wouldn't dry out in the sun. severing their final reproductive tie to the water and becoming fully terrestrial reptiles. This long chain of genetic deviation allowed reptiles to dominate the planet entirely. The fossilized skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus rex, standing nearly 20 feet tall with a mouth full of dagger-like teeth, shows precisely how far sustained directional selection can push a physical form. The leap from deep-sea fish to massive apex land predators is just the visible accumulation of countless broken mathematical ratios, adding up over deep time. Planetary geography can also force the math to break in highly sudden, unpredictable ways. As the Earth's land masses fractured and collided through continental drift, massive populations were forced into severe genetic drift and direct competition. When South America physically joined North America, an aggressive wave of gene flow occurred. The established southern mammals, creatures resembling horses and bears, were completely overridden and outcompeted by the influx of North American fauna. Conversely, the landmass of Australia drifted away, creating a massive geographical barrier. This isolation triggered a severe founder effect. Without the pressure of outside mammalian competition, unique pouched mammals were free to dominate the continent. Following the sudden disappearance of the dinosaurs about 65 million years ago, a few surviving small shrew-like mammals were left with an open planetary canvas. Over millions of generations, directional selection pushed these early viviparous animals to develop larger brains, eventually leading to a species capable of high intelligence, language, and self-consciousness. So when you look at the sheer complexity of the human brain, or the scale of an ecosystem, you aren't looking at a predetermined plan. You are looking at the result of biological chaos. Every single unique trait on this planet exists for one simple reason: nature stubbornly refuses to stay in mathematical equilibrium.